President Wilson once said, "It must be a peace without victory. Only a peace between equals can last. Only a peace, the very principle of which is equality and a common participation, is a common benefit." So President Wilson has the right idea of how we should end the war and what should be signed. But countries in Europe aren't going to listen because they're angry and their feelings are hurt over how World War I ended and started and how it was fought. So the United States is going to actually fight over the Treaty of Versailles. Anytime we go internationally and we want something approved or signed, or the United States is going to join in with, we need the approval of our United States Congress. So President Wilson is going to present this to our Congress. He's going to need the support of both the Republicans and the Democrats. Republicans won control of the Senate in 1918. So getting support for the Treaty of Versailles, signing of the Treaty of Versailles by the United States would be extremely difficult because President Wilson is a Democrat. So the Senate is divided into three groups. The first group is the Democrats who support the treaty. They would like to go ahead and sign the treaty. The second group is the irreconcilables, urged outright rejection of the U.S. participation in the League of Nations. And the third group is the reservationists. They would only ratify the treaty if changes were made. Mostly this was made up of Republicans. The Republicans did not like the fact that there was no military force behind the League of Nations to carry out their decisions. So they wanted a little bit of power behind the League of Nations in order for them to... They wanted power behind the League of Nations because they thought that is what would help that program and group of countries work together, especially if a disagreement broke out that had to be settled. They believed military force would be able to make sure that got settled quickly instead of just negotiations. So the United States, Wilson is going to refuse to compromise with the Senate and with the reservationists. He's going to now go to the American people to get the support, and hopefully his idea was to pressure the Republicans into passing the peace treaty in Europe. He also warned of serious consequences. One of his biggest arguments was that if there would be serious consequences if the world's nations did not work together after World War I to make sure that there would be a continued peace. While out on a tour talking to the American people, President Wilson suffered a stroke, and he's going to spend the rest of his term, his presidential term, living privately in the White House. So, what happened with the United States Senate? Did the U.S. sign the Treaty of Versailles, or did we not sign the Treaty of Versailles? Well, the answer is the Senate is going to reject the Treaty of Versailles. The United States is not going to sign that. We will actually end up signing separate peace treaties with the Central Powers. So we will make our own peace deals with those countries, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and other Central Powers that were involved in World War I. And did we join the League of Nations? Well, that answer is also no. The United States does not join the League of Nations. Without the U.S. support in the League of Nations, the ability to keep world peace is going to remain uncertain. So, the impact of World War I. Well, it was a devastating conflict that shocked the world with staggering loss. There were over 14 million people killed. There were 7 million men permanently disabled. And the war cost over $280 billion. So, this was the war that changed the world. Politically, here's what happened in Europe. And this is the impact of World War I politically. It's going to lead to the overthrow of monarchies in these countries. Russia, Austria-Hungary, Germany, and the Ottoman Empire. So governments are going to start to change. When governments start to change, there can lead to disagreements and unsettledness around Europe. In addition to, it's going to contribute to the rise of the Bolsheviks to power in Russia in 1917. They're going to overthrow Tsar Nicholas, and the Bolsheviks are going to come in and make Russia a communist nation. So changes are happening politically all over Europe. New countries are going to be formed. We're going to look at a map on the next slide that will show what Europe looked like before and then what Europe looked like after World War I. So here we go. If you look over here, moving on with the impact economically, what's going on? Well, it's going to devastate European economies. The war was fought in Europe. A lot of the farmland was fought on and destroyed. So European economies aren't going to be able to recover quickly from that. It's also going to create the United States as the world's leading financial power. Great Britain is going to fall from that role, and the United States is going to take it over. In addition, there's actually going to be economic challenges here at home in the United States. The demand for consumer goods is going to increase. We're no longer at war. People want the things that they couldn't previously get when they were at war. New clothes, shoes, foods that were previously being saved and sent to Europe for the war are now available at home, and men and women and families are going to start to want those consumer goods. This demand is going to lead to inflation, so the rising cost, so it's going to cost you more for something after the war than what it did before the war. Because although consumer goods are going to increase, the need and the demand for those are going to increase, they're not going to raise the wages of the people who are working. So many are going to struggle to afford their day-to-day items. Farmers, they increased their production during the war. Nobody told them to stop farming after the war or to cut back down on the war, because we do stop supplying Europe with our food that we're farming throughout the Great Plains in the United States. So nobody is going to need to buy their food, and it's going to hit them the hardest. The farmers are going to be hit the hardest by this post-war economy. So they're overproducing their food. This is something important to remember. The war ends in 1918. They're going to overproduce food for the next 10 years because nobody has actually told them to slow down their production of crops, corn, wheat, everything else. And it's going to lead to some problems that we're going to talk about when we get to the Great Depression. Lastly, we're going to talk about the social impact of World War I. Socially, it drew women into the workplace. So during the war, because men were leaving and going to war, it's going to draw women into the workplace, replacing men on the work lines. It's going to help pass the 19th Amendment. Women working in the workplace contributed to this because men in Congress are seeing that women can do just what men can do, so why can't they have the vote? They're just as smart and just as able as men to cast ballots. It's also going to encourage African Americans to move north for factory work. The factories during the Industrial Revolution were in the Northeast, and they continued to be in the Northeast during World War I. So a lot of African Americans are going to move from the South to the North, which is going to lead to uneasy racial relations in the North, because whites in the North aren't used to having or seeing a lot of African Americans, or having to deal with what could possibly be the resentment or the discrimination that is going on in the South. So a lot of African Americans see this as a positive, to be able to move to the North for factory and more money. In Europe, they're going to lose almost an entire generation of men. France was left in ruins. The war was basically fought in France. Trenches, thousands of miles of trenches throughout France. Great Britain is now deep in debt to the United States for World War I, because we did sell them and give them and let them borrow a lot of military needs and goods and food from us throughout the war. Reparations imposed on Germany were going to be crippling. The amount of money that Germany owed back to Great Britain and France and other allied nations for the war is going to cripple the German economy. Ultimately, too many issues were left unresolved through the Treaty of Versailles and the end of World War I. This is going to have a great, great impact on Europe over the next 10 years or 15 years leading up to World War II. And we're going to talk about what's going on in the United States leading up through World War II over the next couple of weeks. World War I would not be the war to end all wars many had hoped Too many issues were left unresolved, and too much hostility and anger is actually going to remain. So within a generation, conflict would again break out in Europe, pulling the United States and the rest of the world back into war. Ladies and gentlemen, World War I is now over. I do need you to go back to class jump and answer the question. Do you believe the United States should have joined the League of Nations? Why or why not? Make sure you explain your answer and give a reason.